Hey, good morning. John Strickland here to talk a little bit about contracting strategy and how we view that from the lean perspective and also from the CII and AWP perspective. And this is a presentation I did not long ago with my friend Bruce Burwell at PTAG, and I've updated it just a little bit for the AWP conference. And I understand we're being recorded. So what we'll talk about here is thinking about contracting and why we might want to change how we think about it and what our paradigms are about contracting. A little bit about relational contracting, and then covering the big question, but if I go relational, how do I know I'm getting the best price? And talk about how you go do this and a few golden nuggets. I say lean is a big thing. It's not just for hospitals. I've been a lean advocate for some time. A quick thing about who I am. I've been working in the construction and design build business for a long time, mostly on industrial projects. I've always seemed to go towards a project that had to have very tight schedules and rapid response. I've also had a lot of kind of education in TQM, Lean, Six Sigma, that sort of thing. I've been a very active researcher in CII for a long time. And there was a developer of this collaborative design and scoping process I'll be talking about a bit later. So if you look at why we think we might need to change, the first thing you think is, hey, projects are in trouble. The bigger the projects are, the more trouble they're on. That some research out of CII 341 was about 2/3 of projects fail, and that's when the threshold for failure was only 20% over cost or schedule. So if they were within 20%, they were considered successful. Even by that threshold, they weren't. You go look at the same report of why they were failing. Well, it was mostly how we were working together. You know, the lion's share of it was management factors and organizational factors. And look into that just a little bit more on why that might be happening. This is how I think about alignment drift. And so you start out with a set of owner requirements. Usually the owner themselves is not exactly sure what they want because things change. They go hire someone to do a design concept. The design concept never quite lines up with the owner's requirements because they can't. Then we go prepare bid documents. The bid documents never quite line up with the design concept. And I don't know how many times a contractor will say, hey, I can't bid what you intended to design. But from the bid documents, you get a CMGC, let's say they understand them, but the trade contractors have even a little bit more drift, and they especially don't know how the other trade contractors are going to go work, which affects all their other pricing. And by the time the crew gets out there, there's further drift. They don't understand what the estimator thought. So, and the longest thing, there are countless data translations. People reading one set of documents, making a new list, send that to somebody else, they take off, make a new list manually. It's actually fairly remarkable that we get it done as well as we can, as we do. And then everything starts changing. So these are what I call integration errors. And these integration errors add a lot of risk. They add a lot of problem. And I think one of the bigger things is that they add an awful lot of unnecessary conflict and confrontation. And this may be the root cause of where a lot of those big failures we talked about in the first couple of slides come from. So let's go work on these integration errors, make sure everybody knows what's going on. And the whole concept that we work on here in the lean world, and particularly in the CDS process, is actually putting these people in direct contact with each other in conversation and creating a team. So the next way you think about dealing with integration errors is looking at how we typically deliver projects. And this is no particular company, but in general, the industry does something like this. They select an AE and a CM. They do some kind of a preliminary design. They get some kind of a preliminary estimate and say, hey, does that fit the budget? And if it doesn't, they might go back and change their concepts. But often we get the people all lined up, running the gun, they go right on into detailed design on the contractor bidding. What's insidious oftentimes is the people doing the detailed design don't understand what was in the estimate. The estimators who came up with the assumptions behind the design aren't part of the design. And of course, the contractors weren't part of any of that. So when it comes out there, if it does happen to hit your budget, well, then you have a semi-firm cost. Change orders can begin. But the problem is, hey, what happens if that doesn't fit the budget? And you get all of this disruption happening here that's very, very expensive. Laura, do you on, by the way, at the moment to make a comment about that? Okay. So anyway, if I thought Lloyd might join me here, but the insidious thing about this is often this is very disruptive and very expensive. First off, this costs everybody a lot of money. And this is not a free process. And so in the system, it's there. And it's also, this is very, very disruptive because if you do get to this point where it doesn't, you don't meet the budget, then you can't launch the project, you can't fund the project, the innovation's not moving, you're off to a bad start, and it's tough there. When I ask people, hey, how often does this happen? The answer I get back is a lot, probably about 2/3 of the time, according to the research we saw earlier. In contrast, there is the lean approach, which is we go get the AE and the integrator, and then go to the degree possible, get the people who are actually doing the work and engage them in some sort of big room or collaborative process, get processes and work on the scope real hard, and work very hard on establishing a reliable target cost before we do the detailed design. And the benefit of that, like my slides, is we get a firm cost. It's much sooner and it's much more reliable. It's usually lower. And then we do the detailed design, but it takes some degree less of detailed design because we're not using the design documents, the scoping documents. We've already done that. And then the other obvious advantage, a lot of reasons people try this for the first time, is it's much faster. So we can start construction much faster, and you have a team working together to go help the owner. And I'll pause for a second. Any questions, anything in the chat coming on? Stop for a second. And if not, we'll look at some contracting approaches that kind of fit a continuum between transactional contracts and relational contracts. Transactional contracts are the ones, what you're used to, where one person says they'll do something for a certain price, and they assume a certain degree of certainty that you can understand what's happening and can predict how to react in the various things that will pop up. Transactional contracts are usually pretty good where you have high owner leverage and a favorable buyer's market, where you have high certainty, you have some time, you don't really need flexibility and adaptability, and you don't really care much about the relationships or the quality experience for the people. You know, these are transactional, hard-nosed contracts. Relational contracts work better. That's the sort of contract you use when we don't know exactly what's coming up. What we're agreeing to is how we're going to work together to solve a problem we don't completely understand yet. Marriage is the most common thought of relational contract. Tastes for better or for worse. We don't know what's going to happen. And relational contracts tend to work better for complex projects, projects that have a high degree of uncertainty or a need for innovation that drives some kind of a high need for flexibility and adaptability. And also where you value relationships, you're tired of fighting. And so look at the types of contracts these are. Design, bid, build tends to be over here. IPD tends to be over here. There are many, these are kind of wide bars because there are many different kinds of IPD contracts out there. And of course, there are variations. But it's pretty important to understand what kind of a project you have and which one of these basic approaches fits best as a starting point. The integration methods were studied by CII 341 in 2018, and they came up with 21 different collaborative type methods. The projects that kind of do these sorts of things tend to turn out better. And it's pretty striking that they did this collaboration index. They took the number of the practices being used, and they took the success of the project. And what you can see there is, as you get to about 15 of those practices and get pretty collaborative, well, the bad projects go away. There's nothing in this quadrant. You're basically taking the double bogeys off your scorecard. So this is a huge benefit in reducing risk. And that, to me, that's one of the more striking benefits of the integrated project agreement approach is that you're taking the risk off the table for everybody. You're not transferring risk. You're eliminating much of the risk. And it kind of shows up here the same type of study that they looked at a bunch of non-IPD projects and some IPD projects as far as was the client happy, did we deliver to the cost, and did the contractors make money? And sure enough, yeah, On some traditionally delivered projects, they did great. And one fairly well, 2 out of 3, not so good. Sort of the same thing you saw in that opening research study. The IPD projects, in contrast, generally did pretty well, much more consistent. And I almost would guarantee these were all better experiences for the project participants than these, especially these. The Lean Construction Institute commissioned some study in their business case for Lean some time ago, and what they found, completely different studies than the one you just saw, were that the projects with a high degree of Lean intensity, which would be using many of those same collaborative processes, were twice as likely to come in under budget and 3 times more likely to come in ahead of schedule. And that's my personal experience as well. That's how it tends to work. So, and really, this is nothing new. I started looking at CII stuff back in the 80s, and I remember the first report I read was about constructability, and they were really big about getting the people who are actually going to be doing the work involved in the scoping and the design. That was in 1986. There are bunches of reports since then that are basically advocating the same thing. Here's a handful of them. I'm going to reference a few of those in the next couple of slides. Again, I'll stop for a second to ask if there's a question or a chat or anything here. Hearing none, I'll go forward. So the big question is, we've been saying for a long time, hey, we need to get the people involved earlier in a more relational way. And the big question is, everybody knows this. Why aren't we doing this already? And that was a topic we took up in a CII research paper team on RT 241. We talked about paradigms. And the paradigms were such, these are things that we hold true that really aren't tested. They're the way we see the world, which we hold very dear, but may not be correct. A few of these things in project delivery come up as the need for win-win. We don't appreciate social science. We came across this notion you can manage a project by managing contracts. Trust is for suckers. And the big one here is collaboration sounds great, but I don't want to give up competition. And that's one of the biggest misnomers, is that competition and collaboration are mutually exclusive, because they're not. There's nothing about what I'm talking about here that wants to diminish the role of competition. I actually want to increase it and make it more beneficial. So just curious, if you've ever heard comments like these from contractors, I'll just scroll through them here so you can read them. But probably the biggest one here is, hey, we could have saved the owner a bunch of money if we did a talk to us before they designed the whole thing. And if you look at this, how often do you hear comments like the ones in this bubble? You're going to say, yeah, we hear these all the time. I said these all the time as a contractor. And you hear the designers saying similar things. Hey, we can't design it if you don't get the information. And the biggest one, I think, here is the contractor might have had a great idea if I'd have known it before I designed the whole thing, but I only get paid to design it once. We haven't got time to redo it. So lots of great ideas are left on the table. And if that's the case, and you saw the inefficiency I talked about in earlier slides, how can you possibly think you're getting the best price? You absolutely cannot be. You may be putting the most competitive pressure on bidders, but that's not getting you the best price, because you're bidding a much more difficult thing. And so the notion here is that Lean IPD has a bunch of huge advantages, and largely it's because we recognize it's project delivery as a team sport. But one thing is we drastically can minimize those expensive integration errors and the friction that they create in the team. We're leveraging the talent of the team, and that team is almost always going to find an easier way to do the project. The IPD team is going to be faster because they're running a shorter course or an easier course. And again, we're using trust so that the whole team is there, motivated to minimize the owner's problems, not exploit them. It makes a real difference in how people think about things. We can actually focus the competition on pricing factors, which can be established very early without a complicated process, which make it much more effective at the competition. And also, we're avoiding lots of hidden costs. It costs a lot of money to go get those bids and enforce them. And so it costs a lot of money for a lot of people, even the people who are on the project. That's all buried in our historical cost. And maybe the thing I think is most important
I'm on
is,
mute.
You are creating an adaptive and flexible operating system so we can deal with uncertainty. And the projects we're working on now have a high need, for most part, in the industrial world, to be adaptive and responsive and resilient. And these are, by their nature, much more resilient that way. I'll pause for a second here again. Any questions, comments? We'll go on. So this, everyone really likes this idea of, one of the advantages of the traditional approach, it all comes down to one number. It's a very easy thing to compare, sort of, but it's a two-sided coin. So sure enough, the approach gives you an attractive advantage. All the pricing can be consolidated in a single number, but that's all you can see. You can't see the pricing factors behind it. You don't get to see it until long after the design decisions and scoping decisions that drive it are made. You spent a lot of money preparing documents and all your time. You don't really know where to go change it because all you see is one number. And what you don't see is that there's contingency buried all throughout that number, but you can't find it. And that's one of the advantages of an open, transparent approach is we can go find and eliminate the need for people to carry a lot of this buffer. So lastly, one of the reasons we would think that things are, there's an advantage is that, desirable projects tend to get the most competitive responses. So if you want a great response from your contractors, make it an attractive project. And the IPD projects are very attractive to contractors because they reduce the risk and they get a chance to shape their own destiny. So almost any contractor is happy to give you whatever you want as long as you can specify what that is. Then they understand what their teammates are doing. It's just a completely different experience. My note here is if you find the folks who aren't open to a transparent, open thing, those might not be the best people you want to work with anyway. If you can trust somebody, you can trust them. If you can't, you can't. Another important concept is this notion of leverage in fixed price contracting. So early on, the owner does have the leverage, up until bid and award time. Then after that, the leverage tends to shift to the contractor has most of the leverage. And like I say, if the owner wants to use all of the market leverage to drive the price down, they really can't complain when the contractors come back and use the leverage the other direction. It's just sort of like I comment that the contractors will dance to the tune that the owner plays. And it's just kind of a choice issue. Okay, let's see. If you raise your hand, I see a comment here. If you use raise your hand, I can't see that on here, so maybe our facilitator here could help me with that a bit.
I don't see any hands raised right now, John.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Joan's out there, and so send a note in chat, and we'll catch that. Well, I think actually we'll get through it plenty of time for questions, and we go. Okay. Well, we talked about the grand irony, and one is I was working with Glenn Ballard some time ago that the steps taken to minimize the cost in traditional thing virtually guarantee that the goal won't be realized. That the treatment feeds the disease. I've been explaining that for some time. Another great quote that came out that the irony of fixed price contracts is they're rarely fixed price. And you can read those things. So that's been kind of, we're making the case here for why we think that the owner needs to change things. So a little bit here, we'll shift gears a bit to, okay, so how do I do this? How do I start earlier and more relational? There's tons of stuff written by CII, and these slides are going to be more from the CII perspective than the LCI perspective, but they'll be similar. There are numerous things, and my friend Bruce put this together with CII project phases across the top that will look familiar. In the various other groups who have looked at projects, they kind of break into the same things. In the lean world, we go through validation, pre-con, and execution. The one difference is in the lean world, these lines aren't so sharp. We blend. So we're working on these phases kind of concurrently in many cases. But it all starts with the business planning. A huge difference in the lean world is we include the execution team in understanding the business case. How does the owner intend to make money? How does this work? So if we understand that, we can better help them go do that. And the whole contract is driven on that. Again, it's all about early involvement, and early involvement, not only understanding the scope, but understanding why the owner is doing this project and what it takes for the owner to be successful. And if the owner will share that with the team can help him. That's one of the great notions. The team selection, there's a lot of detail here, but you start out with you start looking for your team. You develop some milestones. You prepare your written proposals, but mostly you're understanding what kind of a team you want and how you want them to help you. So you go through and you start with an interview process where you ask them about how they're going to go do these various integration methods. And this is for the upcoming CII IPD contract, the 21 methods. How are they going to go do that? It's a written response, hopefully very concise. You don't really want a big thing, but have folks tell you where they've done this before, how they plan to help you, what their organization is. From that, usually you'll make a short list, and the most important part are the supplier presentations and interviews, where you bring in the actual team. Does the team understand this? Is this team here ready and willing to help us do it? And that's what I think, which of these players is going to best help our owner successfully complete their mission? And by the way, are they willing to enter into a multi-party agreement where their fee is going to be at risk? Is that comfortable to them or not? And I have found this is easier than you would think it would. We can form these teams easier than most people expect. Contractors usually pretty open to this notion, as long as the owner shows the proper direction and interest. Go a little forth a little bit further. This more detail on the how this works in advanced work packaging. But again, these are all the steps, pretty much the same steps we would use in a lean IPD process, although I was saying they tend to blur a little bit more in lean IPD. But there's methodology to go do this, and you don't have to create it for yourself, because there are lots of people doing this. I'll show you a slide in a second that explains that. So if you look at kind of the world of, this is how CII looked at it, of the world of contracting approaches, from very hierarchical and very transactional to very relational. This is the world of CII. This is the world of lean IPD. And for a lot of things in here, there's some pretty good intersections. So if you are been in this world, you can go here. Okay, you don't necessarily on your first step have to go completely into this lean IPD culture, and that's the CII perspective. The LCI perspective would be the more you do this, the better off you're going to go do. But this is the start. I will comment on some of my most notable projects that we had great success. We're done with very transactional contracts, but we got the team to work in this way. It was a great idea.
So, John, it's Lloyd here. I'm curious, when you look at advanced work packaging, it's very alignment oriented, it's very collaborative in nature. But when you look at the report that came out, all they talk about is traditional contracting. So is this more collaborative approach, is it something that you see companies starting to move towards as an alternative to just our transactional based contracting?
There's certainly a movement there. You know, I sometimes compare relational and IPD style contracting to traditional contracting, like you would compare electric vehicles to combustion vehicles. Yeah, there's this huge infrastructure supporting combustion vehicles, but there's certainly a growing interest in the electric vehicles, and I think that most of us, or most automakers, decide they better get in on it. And I think that the lean style or the relational contracting is a similar way. That it's inherently much simpler. Like electric vehicles are inherently much simpler than combustion vehicles. I think that's a similar advantage. Does that answer your question, Lloyd? Would you like to add to that?
No, yeah, that answers my question. Sorry, I was on mute for a second because I didn't want to. So I'll go back.
The other thing, so again, this is the CII will soon come out with their own version of a multi-party agreement. It is more based around a strong CMGC, a little less focus on integrating trade partners. And so it's just kind of it's that mid-range step I was talking about. You can read here, but basically they're still looking for early involvement. They're still looking for equitable decisions. They're still looking for shared contingency. And the contingency are the buffers that we all need to have on our projects. And one of the great things about the IPD world is that no one can mess with somebody else's buffers without paying for it a little bit. And so in a traditional way, we only care about preserving our buffer. We care about preserving our float. We care about preserving our contingency. This shifts it to you're worried about the system float and the system contingency. And there's a huge advantage to that. And we use a lot of things. There's a lot of lean processes. The lean is really making sure that everybody really understands what's really going on, about what's really important. And so making that much more visible are part of these processes that we talk about that tend to give the advantage. And again, the owners on top here, these are the major players, but they're all focused on the IPD project. There are a bunch of templates out there. I'm familiar with, I've read at least 3 or 4 of these, and there's a new one coming out from CII. The IP, this was coming out. I don't think it's been released yet. There are lots of templates, and you can talk to experts in the industry who can tell you about the subtle differences between consensus docs and Hanson Bridget. This particular template has been used a lot across many owners. Lots of testing, and this is billions and billions and billions of dollars have been done under these contracting approaches. So it's not like this is brand new, never been tried. It just may not be familiar to a lot of people. And it's kind of the nature of the challenge, and we've allowed some time for conversation at the end of this, is I just love this cartoon. Shows all the arrows flying in, and the commander saying, I don't have time for ideas right now. Can't you see I've got a battle to fight? And you hear this all the time on projects. I can't take the chance on this project, or I don't have time right now to go do it. But the longer you wait, the more damage. But this is more than a whimsical connection here. There's a lot of things about the battle that won't change. Construction is still construction. Some things will still be challenging, but a lot of things will change a lot. And you probably don't want to wait until the arrows are flying in to bring out the machine gun. You probably can't teach everyone to use it all at once. But you do need to make sure that the soldiers who are using it understand how it's really supposed to work. So understand the underlying theory. Otherwise, they'll take the machine gun and try and use it as a club, or they'll just abandon it and they'll give up. So you need to make sure some folks understand how this thing works, and we'll go forward. So with that, we went through this fairly quickly. A few nuggets here, and these are some things that Bruce and I came up with when we put this together some time ago. Is we've been talking about collaborative contracting and early engagement for at least 30 years that I know about, and everybody recognizes that's what we need, but for something is blocking us. And so that is part of why we have these institutions. We're attacking the institutional paradigms. So these paradigms that are blocking us are often held by institutions, not individuals. So we need institutions like LCI, like CII, to come back and start challenging the paradigms and show the anomaly and say, hey, what we've thought for a long time may not be true. We also real clear that relational contracting approaches greatly reduce risk, improve outcomes, and also make it a much more positive project experience. You know, we're having a hard time attracting talent in this industry, and that's because sometimes it's a miserable place to work. That we, you know, the way we overcome this inefficiency is to work really, really long hours and have lots of conflict. It's not a pleasant. Sometimes it's the project setting is not great, and the borrowing from our safety experience, we've done a lot better at preventing physical injuries, but we may still be ruining people's lives. And so there's kind of a moral aspect to this that I get drawn to. And it predicts a much more predictable and lower risk result for everybody. And you don't have to give up competition to get this. In fact, you can have more effective competition. I made the case that design bid build is almost certainly not getting you the best price. It may be causing the most competitive pressure. It may be causing the most pain to the supply chain, but it's not getting you the lowest price. And this is something particularly from the CII perspective that Bruce brings out, that, you know, you don't have to go completely to a full-blown IFOA to start getting the benefits. I would say that the culture you build and how people work together tends to be more important than the contract that they use. That the good people can overcome a bad contract, but vice versa, I don't think works. So those are the highlights. Stop for a second, and we'll see if there are any questions, comments, or I know some folks came in late, and if there are a couple of questions, I think we have time to cover a couple of things or revisit a couple of things that you might have missed. So Lloyd, I'll kind of let you moderate for a second.
Yeah, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, my webcam won't, it's turned on, but it's not showing me, but I guarantee you I'm here.
Okay.
So yeah, and that's why I was a little late getting into the room. When we switched your session with JGC, it created a glitch, and that's why a few people, that's why people were having trouble getting into the room, myself included. So anyway, we've got the ability to take questions. If everybody just takes a look at the question section, you can type in the questions. And if you want to ask your question verbally, you can just raise your hand, and Joan will unmute you so you can say your question. So I'm taking a look. I haven't seen a question come in yet, so let me jump in and ask one. So with the, there's an assumption that with the transactional, we'll get the cheapest price, right? That we got this competitive bid and it's free because all the costs of putting the bid together rest with the contractor. So it's low risk, and if it's lump sum, we actually can cap off how much it's going to cost. So is there anything that I just said that you take exception to?
Actually, all of it, and you knew that. So let's kind of tackle one at a time. One is this illusion of the free estimate. So that is the cost to prepare these bid documents and the cost for the whole supply chain to deal with them is enormous. Somebody is paying for that. And there may not be a line item on your project, but that is built into the cost that it takes all of your supply chain to do business with you. And everyone puts a premium in there to go do that. And so if I were an owner, I would start negotiating and say, hey, if I don't do this, what type of savings might I realize? I would ask that question. The notion that you're getting the best price, we challenge, because the most direct thing is that a lean IPD or an integrated team will have a much higher degree of common understanding. So you're not going to have the disconnects and the confusion and the things that just don't come together. They're also almost always going to find a simpler solution. So they're going to be running a shorter course, and the savings of that are usually much more than the general contractor's profit margin, true profit margin on the job, which is, they'll tell us is about 2 or 3%. So let's go attack the huge part of cost, not just the margin on the top. And for risk, when are these integration errors where their scope is missed and someone's going to pay for it, someone's going to fight for it. And so that's the adds a lot of risk, a lot of time, a lot of conflict. So how do I do, Lloyd? Would you like to add something to that that I may have missed?
No, I think that that covers it. It does seem that, what do you think the biggest reason holding companies back from using collaborative contracting is? Because there seems to be a fear that if we're collaborative with our contractors, they're going to take advantage of us. If we share our information on, we don't have the scope clearly completely worked out just yet.
Well, let's see. So there's a fear that they'll take advantage of you if you coordinate with them. If you go within a very transactional mode and you didn't do it perfectly and you didn't have your scope, you're guaranteed they're going to take advantage of it. But so the risk is much greater. I think there's this illusion. I think to answer your question, we have a lot of institutional paradigm and a lot of people have assumed what you've said is true, and it gets built in to the procurement policies and the public interest. And so we need to go challenge those basic assumptions. And so to change the ground rules, and for the firms that are just independent, you're a little reluctant to kind of break from the herd. This is kind of how the industry has worked for a long time. And do I really want to be the one that says, no, I'm not going to follow all the lemmings off the cliff. I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to take the stairs and do something different.
So, yeah, no, that's great. So we actually have a few EPCs on the line. We've got somebody from Black and Veatch. We've got somebody from Fluor, and we have somebody from JGC. And I'm just curious,
And we have a hand raised.
Oh, great.
Jose has a question.
Could you turn on Jose's mic so that he can speak to us? Thanks, Joe. Joan,
Go ahead,
he's still.
Jose.
So you should be able to unmute yourself, Jose, and just ask us your question. Jose, we can't hear. Oh, good. Can you go ahead, Jose?
Yes, sorry, my apologies. I was trying to unmute. Well, first of all, thanks, John, for the for the really great session. From my perspective, or in my experience, that is corresponding to an EPC contractor part, I was very interested. We can say that contracting in our relationship between the EPC contractor, that is our case, with the construction contractors, usually by this time, there's, worldwide, there is a lot of construction contractors without any kind of previous experience with AWP. Probably outside USA, much more. So, when we have a project in East Asia or any other place, South America, we approach normally construction contractors, with some kind, when we are trying to close the contract with them, with the documents explaining them that AWP methodology will be implemented in the project, we explain them, and we transmit this like a requirement for construction contractors. As you could imagine, normally their reaction when they read and we explain them is they say, oh man, this is an increase in our indirect resources, majorly technical office. So they just plan in such a way, increasing their number of resources at site.
Mhm.
So in any case, we try to explain them that this is not what we are looking for, uh, and that as well, uh, learning and getting into the world of AWP is an improvement for them, and will create a lot of synergies. So my question it is there any way or any recommendation on how to approach them, explaining the advantages of construction contractor in previous projects, in order that they can understand that it's not
Yeah.
just this is my question, John.
Well, yeah. So, and I can answer more from the perspective of bringing lean concepts into an AWP, but they're similar. So yes, you see this, and oh my gosh, look at all these meetings I got to go to. So two things. One, invest in the onboarding. So every time we've done one of these projects and done the retrospective at the end, even the ones that have gone really well, is that we should have spent more time onboarding. And the second one, though, is there's a reason why these breakthrough projects are normally done on a cost reimbursable basis. And that is because no one's going to believe you and lower a fixed price. No one's going to do that. And so I recognized this a long time ago, we were doing a very large industrial microelectronics project. And we thought our goal was to reduce the cost by 30% on the labor side from one who had just been done in the same city. And this seemed crazy, and my logic was no one is going to lower their price by 30% based on our promises. So we went on a cost plus fixed fee and used very relational approaches. This was before LCI was formed. This was actually in the 90s. But the insight here was that we went cost plus fixed fee so that we took away that need for them to fear about the direct cost. And by the way, how that project turned out, we didn't save the 30%, we saved 50% over the past project by catching everybody completely off guard. So the short answer, the long answer to your short question was you do the onboarding, and that's the reason why you go reimbursable, because you'll never get the big savings otherwise.
Yeah, fully agree, John. And as well as you said, when getting on the onboarding with them is a key and essential part, because it's completely new. We try to transmit them that this is the future and that is an advantage for them getting involved, and fully agree.
Yeah, my perspective is more on the lean side, but I have found this very easy to explain and to convince contractors. On the collaborative side, because much of there's a whole team studying lean applied to AWP. We have a steering group because they're not the same thing, but they can be complementary. And so the way I would explain it is they are controlling their own destiny, and the way I would work it, they know exactly what scope they're bidding on. Okay, and that is a great comfort to a lot of contractors. And the final thing I say is, for those who aren't familiar with, say, you don't have the high degrees of expertise, you use this to train them or to get them oriented before they show up in the field. So one of the huge advantages of this CDS process that we use in the lean world is that we have mentally rehearsed this over and over before we've mobilized. So the people doing the work are already familiar not only with what their work is going to go do, but how it fits with everybody else's work. And so the team has practiced this at least mentally many times, and they were integral in defining what the scope was. So this huge degree of common understanding is great. Even if they didn't bring a lot to the table, they'll understand what's on the table a lot better.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John.
You bet.
So John, we got a question from Modi. He said that his management believes that feed competition would provide the owner with the best partner, and that when they move to the next phase, it will save them money on feed costs. What's your thoughts on this?
Is that feed or fee?
Feed, front-end engineering development costs.
Yeah. Well, the quick thought about making the transition from one to the other is, yeah, you want the contractor expertise in the earliest stages, but you want the actual performer. So this notion that, hey, we don't have to commit to the contractor. We can get some other contractor and give us ideas, and then we'll go bid it out later. To me, that is much like an NFL team says, I don't need to hire the players for the real game. I'll go get other players to go run the plays or practice during training camp. But then I'll bring the other guys in, whoever I get the best price on. And it's just not going to be the same. And that's what CII said in 1986. It said, if you want effective constructability, go get the guys who are really going to do the job. When I'm doing a CDS session, I want the superintendent, if I can get them there. I want the guy who's going to spot the crane, you know, and visualize how that is. So yes, it's great to bring the advantage, some expertise in there, but they're going to participate in a completely different way. You're not going to get that same spirit of collaboration out of someone who may or may not get the job. That's how I see it.
No, that's great. So we've got, as I said, 3 EPCs on the line, Black & Veatch, JGC, and Fluor. And I'm just curious if either Jan or Carl or Shannon have a question they would like to ask. So if you're interested, you can either raise your hand and we'll make your mic live, or you can just put a question in the question portion of the GoToWebinar. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, if we wrap up per that, that's not a big problem. I think my contacts, people will be able to find out where I am. You can find me on LinkedIn and other places. This is something that I've been working on for a long time, and you can tell it's kind of important to me personally. It's not only that do I want to see projects go well. I'm kind of tired of seeing us beat the crap out of people to get projects done, and it doesn't work. It's very effective at beating the crap out of people, but it's not very effective at getting the projects effective. And much like our safety initiatives, they really changed when it became a moral issue. It's wrong to subject people to this set chance of injury. Well, I think it's also wrong to subject people to the kind of experiences that we put them through on projects. And so as that starts to be effective, or you start to see it that way, it starts to tilt it. And by the way, it's a lot less risk. It's a lot more likely to be a great project if you engage the people successfully.
So one of the things
We
that
do
I
have a
was
question from Shannon. If Shannon can unmute herself.
perfect.
Hello.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, John. Sorry, I missed the first portion of your presentation here, but I did have a question in regards to the comment you made about onboarding contractors. So my question is, what are some of the key points or key elements that you would recommend an EPC company to do when onboarding their contractors to get them up to speed with AWP?
Well, AWP and Lean is go see them, you know, and go do a presentation like this, kind of make the case, kind of explain how it's going to go work with the idea that and try and see it from their perspective and actually go listen to them. So the lean principle of respect for people is understanding them, and the best way to show respect for someone is to listen to them with the idea that you might be influenced. And so when we introduced the lean side of this projects, very often I will personally go out to their office, or maybe have a small pre-bid thing, but explain it. I'd run through a presentation much like the one I did here. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's why we're trying to do it. In fact, many of the slides I used in this, I have probably presented 100 times and used this in as how we explained the early engagement benefits to contractors. So go see them, go listen, and then you they kind of take their comments to heart. And then the third way is put them in a contract where they don't have to bet their company on what you said. You have to take that risk off the table or they won't do it.
Great. And I see that Jan's also got her hand up. So Joan, could you turn on her mic? Or his?
Go ahead, Jan. I believe you do need to unmute yourself now.
There we go. Those tiny buttons in the corner.
Mhm.
Yeah, I missed the entire session due to the, goof up in the schedule. And I'm interested to see your presentation, John. So I guess we can see the recordings later.
Yeah.
Your comments regarding that face-to-face or, contract relationship building early are key and a little bit old school. It's hard to sometimes convince the project teams of that importance and trying to get those relationships established outside of, okay, we're bidding a project now. Let's spend the time out, and you may have covered some of this, but spend the time outside of today we've got to, get together and talk about a project to let's have a separate session to create that relationship and educate our partners, if you will, on what lean and what AWP is all about and how we can both benefit from it. So I am super interested in whatever team you're talking about that's setting lean and AWP. So I don't know how to find out more about that, but
I bet Lloyd can tell you all about it because we're both on the same team.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got a joint working group in CII, and that joint working group has representatives from the Lean Construction Institute and also from CII. And we're actually working on the parameters of a practitioner white paper on how do you combine AWP and Lean together. And so we're definitely interested in getting new people involved. And if you're interested, you can just send a message directly to me. And the chair of that joint working group is Fernando España. But we do have representatives from the Lean Construction Institute too. So I know they're definitely interested in finding more people to get involved.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't tell. I definitely come from the LCI perspective. I was actually part of founding LCI a long time ago. So this has been part of my who I am for a long time. A lot of what you talked about was building trust. The very simple concept that Stephen Covey's son made, that the more trust there is, the faster things happen and the less they cost. And the traditional contracting approach is to prohibit trust. Trust is for suckers. And so we make it a completely transactional, non-trusting thing. Well, it costs a lot. It takes a long time. So and this early engagement is key to that. What I've learned is the best way to build trust among people who may not intrinsically trust each other is to have them work together on solving a problem. So in these early scoping sessions, how are we going to go do something like combine the contractor and the engineer? How would you guys go solve this problem? And they go solve it together, and they learn a lot about each other, but they build a lot of common respect. And so all those comments about the stupid engineer couldn't design this, or the contractor can't follow the simplest instructions, those go away. I don't deal with that. And you essentially, you eliminate vast numbers of RFIs. You almost eliminate them if you do this properly.
And John, could you comment on the industrial space has been a little bit slower to adopt collaborative contracting, but I mean, this has been used on extremely large projects globally for years
Years.
to very good effect, right?
Well, I'll tell you that that's the only way I'll work. So on my projects for the last, almost 25 years or so, that's how it works. It's just there's a phase people go through. What are you talking about? What is this? Then next question is, the next thing is, oh, we already do this, but they're not quite there. Then they'll say it won't work here because my boss was to it. And the final thing is, well, why would you do it any other way? And so there is a threshold that people tend to go through till it becomes obvious that it works. The more complex the project is, the more you need the interactive engagement. The projects now change all the time, and we keep asking the owner to make decisions far in advance of when they really can. And so the biggest cause of change is forcing decisions too early. And so you need a contracting approach and a methodology and a system that allows you to be resilient, adaptive, and agile. So we almost wandered into a whole new field there. But I invite people with a lot of interest to look at this, and maybe you can kind of catch the recording. I did notice we didn't have very many people on as I was going through the very early stages, and we'll find a way to keep getting this message out.
Yeah, and again, I apologize. What happened for anybody who got on late? We switched John's session with the JGC session, and the system was updated, but only partially. So I tried to get into the session myself, and it took me a little while to do it. And so, for those people who wanted to get to the session, and I knew there were a number of people that were quite interested in the contracting, this has been recorded, and this will be available to everybody following the conference. Every single session where we have permission, we will actually make the sessions available on demand. So even if there's another session that you wanted to see, but you couldn't be two places at once, you will be able to pull those up and view them at your leisure.
Good deal.
So we have time for one last question. It's 2 minutes to the hour. Does anybody either want to throw a question in or raise their hand and ask one last question? Or I'm just keeping an eye open here. I'm not seeing anything. So John, I think you covered a lot of really great information. I think you got people interested. I've got to say, I'm on the joint working group, but the Lean AWP joint working group with John, and he's mentioned Bruce Burwell a number of times. Bruce is kind of a fixture at CII, and when I said we want to get a session together on collaborative contracting, and we need somebody from the Lean side to help us out, the first name he picked was John. He said he's the guy. We may have to arm twist him, but we got to get him involved. And then he said, no, truth is he really loves talking about this. He feels it's the way we should go. He's passionate. And, if anybody wants to learn more, get in a room with John for a while.
There you go. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So thanks very much for agreeing to do this, John.
We're
heading into our we're heading into our lunch break, which is an hour long. There are a number of great experts, either speakers or sponsors, and a lot of great attendees. Please send messages to people. Start building your network, because the people that are here are ones that you can get a great conversation going with and also learn from. We'll see you back in one of the breakout sessions in an hour. Just pick the one that's of greatest interest to you. Thanks again, John. Thanks for all of you who attended, and we'll see you in an hour.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.